Good afternoon and welcome to UCA YouTube channel. This is Ruth Boama Jekum, graduate research assistant and doctoral student at UCA headquarters at Michigan State University. I'm here today to interview Dr. Wang as part of her candidacy for the UCA Executive Committee. Today, listeners will be hearing from Dr. Wang, Associate Professor of Educational Leadership in Educational Policy Studies at Georgia State University. Her research interests intersect theory development, technology, decision-making, neuroscience, and social network analysis in educational leadership and policy. Welcome, Dr. Wang.
You're welcome.
So let's begin with the first question. Please tell us about your background and your work as it relates to UCA's mission and goals.
I started my master's program of educational leadership at University of Cincinnati in 2009. After completing my master's program, I went into my doctoral program of educational leadership at UC. At that time, Dr. James Kosharek and Nancy Evers were very active in UCA. So that was my first time. That was my first exposure to UCA. Then in 2011, I attended the UCA convention for the first time as a Jackson Scholar. I later joined a graduate student council working with other council members. We actually started the first UCA Graduate Student Summit. So it's gratifying to see Graduate Student Summit has grown drastically over the years, and graduate students' presence at the UCA convention has been more and more prominent over the time. When I was a graduate student, I won the scholarship to study at UCA Center. The center I chose to spend my summer was Castle at University of Kentucky. The faculty at UK taught me a lot because of the Castle's content expertise in school technology leadership. It was such a rewarding experience that I had that summer, and it was something that I learned that I would never get from my own doctoral program. How does my work relate to UCA mission and goals? Last year, I conducted a network analysis of all of the past UCA convention data.
Wow.
I look at how, I look at how researchers collaborated with one another at UCA conventions by looking into their co-authorship in the papers they presented at UCA convention since the 1980s, since the first UCA convention. One of the purposes of my analysis was to look at how UCA has accomplished its missions through UCA conventions. I know in addition to UCA conventions, UCA also does a lot of other work throughout the year, for example, in school leadership preparation and policy work. But because UCA convention costs a lot of money and UCA program data was public available, so that's why I look into the UCA convention data. So one of the UCA missions was promoting, sponsoring, and disseminating research on school leadership. The findings of my analysis suggest there are some constraints of UCA research collaboration development over the years. Those constraints include research inequality, the high turnover of newcomers to UCA convention. Actually, half of the newcomers didn't come back to UCA convention. And we also had the problem of disconnected schools of thought in our research community. So with those findings, I offered my recommendations to UCA. That's the work that I've done that is mostly connected to UCA missions and goals. My other work that's related to UCA missions and goals was to look at the history of UCA and the history of theory development in the field of educational leadership. I wrote a book on how to develop theoretical framework for educational leadership research. In my book, I included a chapter about the UCEA founding father, Daniel Griffiths, his role at the beginning of the field of educational leadership research, and his debate with Thomas Greenfield in the 1970s and the 1980s. I sometimes wonder what comments Daniel Griffiths would make about our current state of affairs of UCEA. So those are the my background and part of my work that's related to UCEA missions and goals.
Wow, thank you very much. Looks like you have touched on some of the other questions as well. And so I'll jump to how discuss with us how your scholarship, research projects, teaching, and the service can inform the work of UC, particularly the work of the executive committee.
Uh-huh. Well, yes, as you just said, some of my answers to your first question actually touched my answers to this question too. Among my research projects, two lines of my research actually can inform the work of UCEA. The first line is the theory development, and the second line is decision making. First, theory development. So over the past 10 years, that was the time I spent in UCEA community. The dominant theories in the field of educational leadership were social justice, leadership, equity, and being culturally responsive. Those theories and constructs all have their merits. But when I look at the history of educational leadership, and then I envision the future of educational leadership, I think the possibilities of those theories and constructs will remain dominant for another 50 years or 100 years is very, very low. With more empirical evidence, our understanding of educational leadership will absolutely evolve. So new theories and constructs will be proposed by scholars, not just from the United States, but also from other countries and cultures that have been underrepresented in the field of educational leadership, particularly in UCEA community. So I envision that UCEA can create a platform or a marketplace of different ideas and different schools of thought. We ourselves are not good judges of our own ideas because we are the biggest fan of our own ideas. I think for UCEA, we can do what we can do as a research organization is to put those ideas out there and allow future scholars to evaluate our ideas. I don't want the history of Galileo's unfair treatment to repeat itself in our research community. It hasn't happened before. I hope it won't happen in the future. So allow future scholars to judge our ideas. My second line of research is about decision making. So I study not just leaders' individual decision making, but also group decision making. I have been in a lot of UCEA meetings, big meetings or small meetings. I have observed the procedures and the protocols that were used to make group decisions or collective decisions. And I have observed how those meetings were run by whoever presided the meetings. There are a lot of rooms for improvement. So UCEA community can collectively make high quality decisions. So those are my scholarship that can inform the work of the UCEA Executive Committee.
Thank you very much. It seems you almost touched on the final question, but I'll just ask anyway. So just share the reasons why you have chosen to run for the executive committee and your vision for the future of UCA, even though there was a hint of it in your previous answer.
Right. Yes. As you said, I've already provided some of the hints. So of course, when I first joined UCEA as a plenary member, and I was looking at all those EC members, I wonder, okay, what was the process? What would be the criteria for people to serve on EC? Over the years, I had better understanding of what what EC does. But the serious thought of running for EC came to my mind actually last year when I was writing up my results of my network analysis of UCEA research collaboration networks. I used the UCEA past research collaboration network metrics to run a simulation study. So I wanted to see what would happen in the future if UCEA continues its status quo. I actually I recorded my analysis, my simulation analysis in the video. Actually, it's public available on YouTube. So the results of my simulation study are actually quite disturbing to me. If UCEA doesn't make changes, the UCEA research community will always be fragmented by isolated schools of thought. People may keep leaving the organization. As I mentioned, half of the newcomers to UCA convention actually never come back. And I know we have some concerns of the, in our PSR's self-studies, we have some concerns of the climate in UCA community. But with my simulation study, actually, the prediction is that if UCA doesn't make changes, people will keep leaving the organization. The consequences is that we will never be able to leverage the diversity that we have in our community to propel the advances of the world, the advances of the field, and to fulfill the missions and goals of UCEA. So here I just want to, talking about my vision for the future of UCEA, I just want to focus on one of the recommendations that I wrote and I provided for UCEA. I think it is very important for UCEA leadership teams to think about how to restructure the social infrastructure of conducting UCEA conducting educational leadership research, and how community members communicate with each other. UCEA has experienced a lot of changes in its leadership, including executive director, presidents, the EC, and the plenum. And we also had changes of our memberships and our graduate students. So we need to think about how we can create a marketplace of ideas. So we don't create a 1% problem, which is the rich get richer. I know that we have worked a lot to on the diversity, equity, and inclusion issue, but I think diversity is just the means. It's not the end. The end is to use community members' diversity to create an inclusive climate in the community. Demographic diversity doesn't automatically translate itself into synergies among different groups. So we probably needed to ask some of tough questions to ourselves. Do we have an effective structure and a set of policies and procedures that integrate and unify the individual differences for the greater good, which is to fulfill the missions and goals of UCEA, to promote, disseminate the research, to improve school leadership preparation, and to have positive influences on education policy. So that's how I envision the future of UCEA. Hopefully I can contribute a small part to that future. And I think that's one of the motivating force that drove me to run for EC.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time and your thoughtful responses, Dr. Wang. This interview will be archived on the UCA YouTube channel. Listeners can access or share the interview at any time. We also encourage listeners to post comments and questions on this interview in the comments section. Thank you and goodbye.